The house felt unusually quiet that Thursday evening. Sarah had just finished preparing dinner when she realized how empty the large family home felt, with just her and Jake there. Her husband was away on another business trip, and her younger daughter was at a sleepover. At 38, Sarah found herself alone with her 20-year-old stepson more often than she cared to admit. "Jake, dinner's ready," she called out, wiping her hands on the kitchen towel. The sound of footsteps echoed from upstairs as Jake made his way down. He'd been living with them for 2 years now, ever since his mother had passed away and his father, Sarah's husband, had gained full custody. What had started as an awkward adjustment had slowly transformed into something resembling a normal family dynamic. "Smells amazing, Sarah," Jake said as he entered the kitchen, his hair still damp from a shower. He wore a simple white t-shirt that highlighted his athletic build from years of college basketball. Sarah felt a flutter in her chest, something she'd been trying to ignore for months now. Just some pasta and garlic bread, nothing fancy. As they sat across from each other at the dining table, the silence felt different tonight, more charged. Sarah found herself stealing glances at Jake as he ate, noticing how he'd grown from the awkward teenager she'd first met into a confident young man. "You know," Jake said suddenly, breaking the quiet, "I never really thanked you properly." "For what?" Sarah asked, setting down her fork. "For everything. For taking me in, for treating me like I belonged here. I know it couldn't have been easy." Sarah's heart clenched. There was something in his voice, a vulnerability that made her want to reach across the table and comfort him. "Jake, you do belong here. This is your home." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. Sarah felt her cheeks flush and quickly looked away, focusing on her plate. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if Dad had married someone else," Jake continued, his voice softer now. "Someone who didn't care, who just saw me as a burden." "Don't say that," Sarah whispered, finally meeting his gaze again. "You're not a burden, Jake. You never have been." The way he was looking at her made Sarah's breath catch. There was something in his dark eyes, gratitude mixed with something deeper, more complex. She felt her pulse quicken and tried to shake off the feeling. After dinner, they found themselves in the living room. Sarah had changed into comfortable pajamas, soft cotton pants, and a loose t-shirt, while Jake wore basketball shorts and the same white shirt from earlier. The evening news droned on the television, but neither was really watching. "Want some tea?" Sarah offered, already knowing Jake's answer. It had become their evening ritual, herbal tea while they talked about their days. "Always," Jake smiled, and Sarah noticed how his whole face lit up when he did that. As she prepared the tea in the kitchen, Sarah found her mind wandering to dangerous territory. She'd been lonely lately, more lonely than she cared to admit. Her marriage had grown, distant routine. David was always traveling, always focused on work. And here was Jake, kind and attentive in ways that David no longer was. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "These thoughts are wrong." But when she returned to the living room with 2 steaming mugs, Jake had moved to the couch and he patted the space beside him. "Sit with me? This old movie's starting. Looks like something from the 90s. Sarah hesitated for just a moment before settling beside him, careful to maintain some distance. But the couch seemed smaller tonight, and she was acutely aware of his presence next to her. The movie was indeed from the 90s, a romantic drama about forbidden love that made Sarah squirm uncomfortably. She found herself stealing glances at Jake's profile in the flickering light from the television. His jawline had sharpened over the past year, and there was a maturity in his features that hadn't been there before. "Sarah?" Jake's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Can I ask you something personal?" Her heart started beating faster. "Of course. Do you ever feel lonely, even when you're not alone?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Sarah set down her mug with trembling hands. "Why would you ask that?" "I don't know. Sometimes I watch you and you seem sad. Like you're missing something." Sarah felt exposed, as if Jake could see straight through to her soul. Everyone feels lonely sometimes, Jake. It's normal. But you deserve better than that, he said, turning to face her fully. You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are. The sincerity in his voice made Sarah's chest tight. Jake, I'm serious, Dad doesn't realize how lucky he is. There was something in the way he said it, an undercurrent of meaning that made Sarah's skin prickle with awareness. The space between them on the couch suddenly felt charged with electricity. You shouldn't say things like that, Sarah whispered, but she couldn't bring herself to look away from his intense gaze. Why not, if it's true? The movie continued playing in the background, but neither of them was paying attention anymore. Sarah felt as if she were teetering on the edge of a cliff, knowing she should step back but unable to move. Jake, she started, but the words died in her throat. Without thinking, Jake reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The simple touch sent a shockwave through Sarah's entire body. His hand lingered near her cheek, and she found herself leaning into the warmth of his palm. Sarah, he breathed, and she could hear the conflict in his voice, the same battle between right and wrong that was raging in her own heart. Time seemed suspended as they looked at each other, both knowing they were crossing into dangerous territory, but unable to stop. Sarah's rational mind screamed warnings, but her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely think. Jake's thumb traced gently across her cheekbone, and Sarah's eyes fluttered closed at the tender gesture. When she opened them again, his face was closer than before. We shouldn't, she whispered, even as her body betrayed her by leaning toward him. I know, Jake replied, his voice rough with emotion. But I can't stop thinking about... Just then, the front door slammed shut with a bang that echoed through the house. Sarah and Jake sprang apart as if they'd been burned, both breathing heavily and staring at each other with wide, startled eyes. Hello? Anyone home? David's voice called, out from the entryway. Sarah's heart was racing for entirely different reasons now. He's not supposed to be back until tomorrow, she stammered, jumping up from the couch. Jake ran his hands through his hair, looking as shaken as Sarah felt. Sarah, what were we? Nothing, she said quickly, smoothing down her clothes with trembling hands. Nothing happened. But even as she said it, they both knew that wasn't true. Something had happened. Something that would change everything between them. As David's footsteps approached the living room, Sarah caught Jake's eye one more time. The look they shared was filled with confusion, guilt, and something else. Something neither of them was ready to name. David's return shattered the charged atmosphere like glass hitting concrete. Sarah forced herself to smile as her husband entered the living room, his tie loosened and briefcase in hand. Hey, honey, David said, barely glancing at her before nodding at Jake. Son, didn't expect to find you two watching movies together, sci-fi? Meeting in Chicago got canceled, he continued, settling into his recliner with a tired sigh. Figured I'd surprise you by coming home early. Sarah's mouth felt dry as cotton. That's wonderful. Are you hungry? I can heat up some dinner. Already. Ate on the plane, David replied, already reaching for the remote. Mind if I catch the news? Need to see how the market's closed. Just like that, the intimacy of the evening evaporated. Sarah felt the familiar sting of being dismissed, of being treated more like a housekeeper than a wife. Beside her, Jake shifted. Uncomfortably, the tension in his shoulders visible. I think I'll head to bed, Jake said quietly, standing up. His eyes briefly met Sarah's, and she saw her own confusion reflected there. Night, son, David called absently, already absorbed in the financial reports. Good night, Jake, Sarah managed, proud that her voice sounded normal despite the chaos in her chest. After Jake disappeared upstairs, Sarah sat frozen on the couch, hyper-aware of every sensation. Her cheek still tingled where Jake's thumb had touched her skin. The memory of his intense gaze made her stomach flutter in ways she hadn't felt in years. What is wrong with me? She thought desperately. He's my stepson. This is so wrong. But even as she tried to convince herself it was just a moment of weakness, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. The next morning brought no relief. Sarah woke early, having barely slept, and made her way to the kitchen to start coffee. Her hands shook slightly as she measured the grounds, replaying every second of the previous evening. "Morning," came Jake's voice from behind her. Sarah's entire body tensed. She turned slowly to find Jake standing in the doorway, wearing only pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair mussed from sleep. The sight of him made her pulse quicken all over again. "Good morning," she replied, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Coffee's almost ready?" They moved around each other carefully in the kitchen, both hyper-aware of maintaining distance. When Jake reached past her for a mug, Sarah caught a whiff of his cologne mixed with something uniquely him, and she had to grip the counter to steady herself. "Sarah, about last night?" Jake began hesitantly. "Nothing happened last night," Sarah said quickly, not meeting his eyes. "We were just talking, that's all." Jake was quiet for a long moment. When Sarah finally looked up, she found him studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "Right," he said finally. "Just talking." But the way he said it suggested he didn't believe it any more than she did. David appeared in the kitchen just as the awkward silence was becoming unbearable. "Morning, family," he said cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the tension crackling between his wife and son. Sarah busied herself making breakfast, grateful for the distraction. But she could feel Jake's eyes on her as she moved around the kitchen, and every accidental touch. His hand brushing hers as he reached for the orange juice, their bodies briefly pressing together as they passed in the narrow space between the counter and island, sent electricity shooting through her. After David left for work, the house fell into an uncomfortable quiet. Sarah threw herself into household tasks, desperately trying to avoid being alone with Jake. But he seemed to be everywhere, in the living room when she went to dust, in the hallway when she was carrying laundry upstairs. By afternoon, the tension was unbearable. Sarah was folding clothes in the laundry room when Jake appeared in the doorway. "We can't keep pretending this isn't happening," he said quietly. Sarah's hands stilled on the shirt she was folding. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Jake stepped into the small room, and suddenly the space felt impossibly cramped. "Something changed between us last night, and we both know it." Sarah finally looked up at him, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. "Jake, please, we can't talk about this." "Why not? Because it's inconvenient? Because it's complicated? Because it's wrong." The words burst out of her louder than she'd intended. "You're my stepson. I'm married to your father. Whatever this is, it can't happen." Jake moved closer, and Sarah found herself backing against the washing machine. "But you feel it too, don't you?" he said softly. "This pull between us. You can't tell me I'm imagining it." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "It doesn't matter what I feel. Some lines can't be crossed. Can't they?" Jake's voice was barely above a whisper now. He was close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Jake," she breathed, and she hated how his name sounded like a plea on her lips. "Tell me you don't think about it," he challenged gently. "Tell me you don't wonder what it would be like if things were different." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to block out his words, but they echoed in her mind anyway. Because he was right. She had been thinking about it. She'd been thinking about little else since the moment his hand had touched her face. "I see how lonely you are," Jake continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I see how Dad takes you for granted, how he barely notices you anymore. You deserve so much better than that." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. "Stop. Please. You're beautiful. Sarah, you're kind and funny and incredible, and if you were mine, I would never— But I'm not yours." Sarah's eyes flew open, meeting his tortured gaze. "I can't be yours, Jake. I'm your father's wife." "A wife he ignores," Jake said bitterly. "A wife he treats like furniture." The truth of his words hit Sarah like a slap. Because he was right. David did ignore her. Their marriage had become a series of polite interactions and separate lives under the same roof. "That doesn't make this right," she whispered, but her conviction was wavering. Jake reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers grazed her arm, sending shivers through her entire body. "I know it's not right," he said quietly. "I know it goes against everything we're supposed to feel, but I can't help it, Sarah. I can't help the way I feel about you." Sarah's resolve crumbled a little more. "Jake, I think about you constantly," he confessed, his hand still resting lightly on her arm. "I think about making you smile, really smile. I think about holding you when you're sad. I think about—" "Don't," Sarah whispered, but she made no move to step away from his touch. "I think about kissing you," Jake finished, his voice rough, with need. The confession hung in the air between them like a live wire. Sarah's breathing was shallow, her skin burning where his fingers touched her. She knew she should push him away, should run from the room, should do anything but stand there drowning in his dark eyes. Instead, she found herself swaying toward him, drawn by an invisible force she couldn't resist. Jake's other hand came up, to cup her face, just like he had the night before. This time there was no movie playing, no distractions, just the two of them in the small, intimate space of the laundry room. "We shouldn't," Sarah whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. "No," Jake replied, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "But I need you to know how I feel. I need you to know that you're not alone." Their faces were inches apart now, and Sarah could feel Jake's breath warm against her lips. Time seemed suspended as they stared at each other, both balanced on the edge of a precipice. "If we do this," Sarah whispered, "there's no going back." "I know," Jake breathed, his eyes never leaving hers. They were so close now that Sarah could see her own reflection in his pupils. Her heart was beating so fast she felt dizzy. Jake's thumb continued its gentle caress of her cheek, and she found herself closing her eyes, overwhelmed by the sensation. When she opened them again, Jake's lips were so close to hers that one tiny movement would close the gap between them. The air in the room felt electric, charged with possibility and danger. Sarah's hands came up to rest against Jake's chest, and she could feel his heart racing beneath her palms. They were both breathing hard, both trembling with the weight of what was about to happen. Just as Jake began to lower his head, just as Sarah started to rise up to meet him, the sound of a car door slamming in the driveway shattered the moment like an explosion. They sprang apart instantly, both gasping and wide-eyed with shock and desire. "Dad," Jake whispered hoarsely. Sarah's hands flew to her hair, trying to smooth it down with shaking fingers. "He's early. He's never early." The front door opened with a bang, and David's voice echoed through the house. "Sarah! Jake! I brought lunch from that deli you like." Sarah and Jake stared at each other in panic and confusion, both breathing hard and struggling to compose themselves. The moment they'd almost shared hung between them like a ghost, and Sarah knew that despite the interruption, everything had changed. They'd crossed a line today, even if they hadn't quite reached the destination. And now there would be no pretending, no going back to the way things were. "We have to—" Sarah started, then stopped, not knowing how to finish the sentence. "I know," Jake said quietly, running his hands through his hair. "We have to act normal." But as they heard David's footsteps approaching, both of them knew that nothing would ever be normal again. The following week passed in a haze of stolen glances and electric tension. Sarah found herself caught between guilt and an overwhelming longing that grew stronger each day. Jake's confession in the laundry room had opened a door that neither of them seemed able to close. David remained oblivious, buried in work calls and business trips. He announced over breakfast on Friday that he'd be flying to New York for the weekend, another urgent client meeting that Sarah suspected was more about avoiding home than actual business. "I'll be back Sunday night," he said, barely looking up from his phone. "Try not to burn the house down while I'm gone." It was meant to be a joke, but Sarah felt the familiar sting of dismissal. Across the table, Jake's jaw tightened as he watched his father's casual indifference. After David left, the house felt different, charged with possibility and danger. Sarah tried to maintain normalcy, cleaning and organizing, but she was hyper-aware of Jake's presence. Every room felt too small when he was in it. Saturday evening found them back in familiar territory. Sarah cooking dinner while Jake helped, their bodies moving around each other in a careful dance of almost touches and lingering looks. "Sarah," Jake said quietly as she stirred the pasta sauce, "we need to talk about what's happening between us." Sarah's hand stilled on the wooden spoon. "Jake, please. We can't keep pretending this isn't real." She turned to face him, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth. Tell me I'm not imagining this connection between us." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. At 20, Jake had his father's strong jaw and dark hair, but his eyes were kinder, more perceptive. He saw her in ways David never had. "You're not imagining it," she whispered, the admission feeling like jumping off a cliff. Jake stepped closer, and Sarah could smell his cologne, could see the pulse beating rapidly at his throat. "Then why are we fighting it?" "Because it's wrong. Because your father—" "My father doesn't love you the way you deserve to be loved," Jake interrupted gently. "He takes you for granted. He doesn't see how incredible you are." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. "That doesn't make this right." "Maybe not, but it makes it real." Jake's hand came up to cup her face, and this time Sarah didn't pull away. "Sarah, I'm in love with you." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Jake, no. I am. I've been fighting it for months, but I can't anymore. I love your laugh, the way you hum when you cook, how you always put others first. I love everything about you." Sarah closed her eyes, overwhelmed. "We can't do this." "Why not? Who are we hurting? Dad barely notices you exist." "That's not the point, isn't it?" Jake's thumb traced her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "Sarah, look at me." She opened her eyes to find him studying her with an expression so full of love and longing that it took her breath away. "I see you," he said softly. "I really see you. And I hope, that you see me too. Not as David's son, but as Jake. As the man who would do anything to make you happy." Sarah's resolve was crumbling. "Jake, tell me you don't feel anything for me, and I'll walk away right now. I'll transfer schools, move out, whatever it takes. But if there's even a chance—" Sarah stared into his eyes, seeing her own desperate longing reflected there. The truth was, she'd fallen for him too. Gradually, then all at once. His kindness, his attention, the way he made her feel seen and valued. Somewhere along the way, maternal affection had transformed into something much more dangerous. "I do feel something for you," she whispered, the confession tearing from her throat. "God help me, I do." Jake's face transformed with relief and joy. "Sarah? But we can't act on it. We can't." "Why not?" He stepped closer, and Sarah found herself backed against the kitchen counter. "We're both adults. We both want this. Because it would destroy everything. Your relationship with your father, my marriage." "What marriage?" Jake asked quietly. "When was the last time he really talked to you? When was the last time he made you feel special, wanted?" Sarah couldn't answer because she couldn't remember. David's emotional absence had become so normalized that she'd stopped expecting more. "I could make you happy," Jake continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I could love you the way you deserve to be loved." "Jake, please." But he was so close, now that she could feel the heat from his body, could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. His hands came up to frame her face, and Sarah felt herself drowning in his gaze. "One kiss," he whispered. "Just one. Then we'll know for sure." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Every rational thought screamed at her to push him away, but her body was betraying her, swaying toward him like a flower, toward sunlight. "We shouldn't," she breathed, but her hands were already coming up to rest against his chest. "I know," Jake replied, his lips now just inches from hers. But I need to know what it feels like to kiss the woman I love. The word love shattered the last of Sarah's resistance. With a soft sob, she closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tender and questioning. But when Sarah's lips parted slightly, Jake deepened it, pouring months of suppressed longing into the contact. Sarah's hands fisted in his shirt as she kissed him back, all her loneliness and desire flowing into this one perfect, impossible moment. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard and staring at each other in wonder and shock. "Oh, God," Sarah whispered, touching her lips with trembling fingers. "What have we done?" "Something that's been building for months," Jake replied, his voice rough. "Something that feels more right than anything else in my life." Sarah closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. "We can't do this again. This was a mistake." "Was it?" Jake asked softly. "Because it felt like the most honest thing either of us has done in a long time." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of a key in the front door made them both freeze. David's voice echoed through the house, earlier than expected. "Sarah, I'm home." The meeting got canceled, so I caught an earlier flight. Sarah and Jake sprang apart, both wide-eyed with panic and guilt. Sarah smoothed her hair with shaking hands while Jake turned away, running his fingers through his disheveled locks. "In here," Sarah called out, proud that her voice sounded relatively normal despite the chaos in her chest. David appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie. "Smells good. What's for dinner?" "Just pasta," Sarah managed, turning back to the stove with trembling hands. As David launched into a story about his canceled meeting, Sarah caught Jake's eye in the reflection of the kitchen window. The look they shared was full of confusion, desire, and the terrible knowledge that they'd crossed a line from which there was no return. The kiss had changed everything. There would be no more pretending, no more denying the feelings that had been building between them. They were in love, desperately, hopelessly, impossibly in love. And as Sarah served dinner with hands that still shook from Jake's touch, she knew that their secret would either destroy them all or force them to make an impossible choice. The forbidden had become reality, and there was no going back.